It was nearly a decade ago, but for Jamie Dornan, that first day still feels as vivid as if it happened yesterday. Sitting in a recent interview, he smiled when the host mentioned 50 Shades of Grey. "I'll never forget our first scene together," he said softly. "That day changed everything." It was 2013. The air in Vancouver was heavy with anticipation as production began on one of the most talked about films in years. The world was already buzzing, tabloids speculating, fans dissecting every casting choice. Jamie had joined the project late, stepping into a role that carried equal parts excitement and pressure. Dakota Johnson, calm but quietly intense, was already deep into her preparation. And though they had met briefly during rehearsals, this was the first time the cameras would roll, the first time Christian Grey and Anastasia Steele would truly exist. Jamie remembered walking onto the set that morning with a knot in his stomach. "I'd done countless auditions, hundreds of scenes in other projects," he recalled, "but this was different. Everyone in that room knew this film would follow us for years. You could feel the weight of it." The scene wasn't one of the infamous ones. It was simple, Christian and Anna's first meeting in the Grey Enterprises office. But it was the beginning of everything, both on screen and off. Dakota was already there when he arrived, sitting quietly at the desk, flipping through her script. She looked up, smiled, and said, "Ready, Mr. Grey?" It wasn't part of the scene, just a joke to break the tension, but it worked. Jamie laughed, the room relaxed, and something clicked. "There was this moment," he said, his voice turning thoughtful. "I looked at her, and for the first time, I wasn't thinking about cameras or marks or the crew. It was just her and me. That's when I knew, whatever happened with this film, we'd be okay because we trusted each other." As the director called action, Jamie slipped into character, but he could still feel Dakota's energy, calm, fearless, and completely in the moment. Their eyes met, and the chemistry everyone had been worried about suddenly came alive. It wasn't forced, it wasn't rehearsed, it was effortless. Behind the scenes, the crew exchanged glances. The tension in the room wasn't just cinematic, it was real. "When we finished the take, nobody spoke for a few seconds," Jamie recalled. "It was quiet, the good kind of quiet, when you know you've just captured something honest." For Dakota, that first scene was just as unforgettable. In an old interview, she once said, "We were both nervous. You can't fake that kind of first-day energy." But he made it easy. Jamie's presence was grounding, kind, but strong. "I think that's when Christian and Anna truly came to life." Jamie admitted that, at that moment, he stopped seeing Dakota as the daughter of famous actors, or his co-star. She became a partner, someone who understood the unspoken pressure of what they were about to build together. "It's a rare thing," he said, "when you meet someone who just gets it, who knows what you're feeling without saying a word." That day, between takes, they barely talked about the script. Instead, they shared stories about family, childhood, and their mutual love for dark humor. The laughter between them was easy, natural, the kind of bond that would later carry them through the film's most vulnerable scenes. Jamie remembered one small moment that never made it into the final cut. During a rehearsal, he dropped a line and muttered a quiet curse under his breath. Dakota laughed. Not a polite laugh, but the kind that fills a room. "Don't worry," she said. "Anna's nervous too." It broke the ice completely. "I'll always remember that," Jamie smiled. "She saved me from taking it all too seriously. From that second on, we were in it together." When the day ended, the director approached them and said, "You two just changed the tone of this film." Jamie didn't fully understand then, but he does now. That first day wasn't just about two actors finding their rhythm. It was about building trust, finding authenticity in a world of artifice. Years later, when asked why audiences still feel their chemistry, Jamie gave a simple answer. Because it was real, maybe not in the way people imagine, but in the way two people can meet, respect each other, and create something honest together. That's rare. He paused, eyes soft with memory. There was a moment in that first scene, just a look, a heartbeat, and I knew this film would never be the same again. That moment, that connection, became the foundation of everything that followed: the friendship, the rumors, the legacy. For Jamie, it was the day he stopped worrying about living up to the character and started living in the truth of the story. "It's funny," he said with a wistful smile. "All these years later, people still ask what it was like. And the truth is, I can't describe it. You just had to be there, in that room, in that silence, when everything began." When the interviewer asked Jamie why that moment had stayed with him for so long, his answer came without hesitation. "Because it was real," he said. "There was nothing staged about that first day. It was just two people trying to find truth in a make-believe world." The conversation drifted easily between laughter and reflection. But underneath his calm tone was something deeper, a quiet gratitude that time hadn't erased. Years had passed since 50 Shades of Grey premiered, and both Jamie and Dakota had gone on to lead very different lives. Yet, whenever either of them spoke about those early days, there was always the same softness in their voice, like a shared secret they still protected. For Jamie, that unforgettable moment wasn't just about the film's success or its cultural impact. It was about what happened after the cameras stopped rolling. "We'd just finished that first scene," he recalled, "and everyone was relieved. There had been so much build-up, so many nerves. The crew started clapping, and I remember looking over at Dakota. She just grinned at me, like, 'See? We survived.' That smile told me everything." He laughed when he remembered how awkward they both were in those first few days. "We were pretending to be these confident, complicated people," he said, "but inside we were just two actors terrified of disappointing the world." He paused, then added, "It's funny, that fear, it brought us closer. You can't fake vulnerability. You either trust your partner completely or you fall apart." And trust became the cornerstone of everything that followed. Between takes, they learned each other's rhythms. The way Dakota would exhale before a difficult line, the way Jamie's jaw would tighten when he was deep in character. It wasn't romantic, he clarified. It was connection, a kind of unspoken understanding that made the work honest. Dakota, in a later interview, echoed the same sentiment. "Our first scene together taught us everything," she said. "Jamie and I didn't need to talk about chemistry. We just had to listen. From that day on, it felt like we were always looking out for each other." That bond carried them through grueling schedules, tabloid scrutiny, and the emotional intensity that came with portraying two people locked in a strange kind of love. "I don't think either of us realized, at the time, how much we'd rely on that connection," Jamie admitted. "It became our safety net. Whenever the world outside got too loud, we'd just look at each other, laugh, and remember why we started." But the memory that truly lingered wasn't dramatic at all. It happened late that same night, long after everyone had gone home. Jamie had returned to the set to grab something he'd left behind. The room was dark except for a single lamp still glowing by the desk where Dakota had been sitting hours earlier. The script was open, one line highlighted in yellow. "There's something about you I can't explain." He smiled, realizing it was one of Anna's lines to Christian, and somehow, it now felt like something he could have said to Dakota, not as a character, but as himself. "That line summed up everything about our dynamic," he said softly. "We could never really explain it. It just was." Over the years, fans have romanticized that partnership, turning it into legend. But for Jamie, the truth is simpler, and far more meaningful. "People think of it as this big, cinematic connection," he said. "But for us, it was made of small things. A shared joke, a steady look, the kind of silence that doesn't feel uncomfortable. That's what made it unforgettable." He remembered one particular day during the second film, when Dakota was exhausted and the shoot dragged into the early morning hours. She was sitting on the floor, completely drained, he recalled. "I sat next to her, and we didn't talk. We just sat there, both half asleep. And I thought, this is what trust looks like." It started from that first scene. Two strangers trying to make each other feel safe, and it never really left us. When asked if they still stay in touch, Jamie smiled. "Of course," he said. "You don't go through something like that and just forget. We've both moved on, built our lives, but whenever we see each other, it's like no time has passed. We just laugh about how nervous we were that first day." Years later, When the interviewer replayed the question, "What made that moment so unforgettable?" Jamie leaned back, eyes distant, a small smile tugging at his lips. "It wasn't the cameras or the fame," he said. "It was the beginning of understanding what connection really means. That's something you don't get to experience often in this business. For me, it was a once-in-a-lifetime moment." He paused, then added quietly, "You never forget the first time someone looks at you and sees you. Not the character, not the pressure, just you. That's what happened that day. And it changed everything." And perhaps that's why, even after all these years, when people mention Dakota Johnson, Jamie doesn't talk about the controversies or the fame. He talks about that first moment, the one that began with nervous laughter, a single look, and a connection that still feels, in his words, unforgettable.